It's Thursday morning, 9:30 a.m. in Switzerland, and it's Space Café time. Our second Space Café Space Law Breakfast with Stephen Freeland will begin soon. Thanks for joining us for our breakfast roundtable today. As always, we appreciate your participation and your ongoing feedback. I'm Torsten Kriening, your co-host today and publisher of SpaceWatch.Global, and we are a Switzerland-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our bi-weekly, just sent out an hour, I think, ago, or daily newsletter and the Space Café podcast. We also keep our fan shop open online for you, where you can support us actively and become a Space Watcher. The edition 1 has cool mugs and other cool items for you, your friends, and the ones you love. Your support is needed to keep our work alive, and we do that for you. If you have missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our website at the event section, and then in 2 weeks also on YouTube. We host our Space Café Space Law Breakfast with Stephen Freeland live on a bi-monthly base. With that, I'm handing over to your host today, to Professor Stephen Freeland, live in Sydney, Australia. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. And from Sydney, where it's 7:30 in the evening, good evening. It's lovely to be here. Thanks, everybody, for joining us for the second of our Space Law Breakfast. We've had a great response to the first one, and hopefully today you'll enjoy. I hope you've all brought your croissant. There's mine. And if you think it's a strange time for someone to have a croissant, it's never a strange time to have it, even if it's 7:30 in the evening. I just want to thank everybody who's sent notes during the week. We've had a lot of rain here in Sydney and flooding all over the place. But today the sun was out, so hopefully we're on the way through. So I hope wherever you are, all is well, you're safe, and sit back, and I hope you'll enjoy today. As Torsten said, we're here to talk about law. We're looking at recent events with a legal lens. We're trying to, and this is a word we made, demystify space law and also have a bit of fun on the way. And as I said, we need no excuse to have a croissant. This is not a law webinar. We're here really to look at what's been happening and then to say, well, you know, there are a lot of relevant issues, but law is also there. And that's why we have experts, and we've got some, fantastic experts today to go through it. As Torsten said, please give us your feedback. Please ask questions. We will try to get to as many as we can. You'll know in the tradition, and we already have a tradition in Space Law Breakfast of describing space law in one word. If you haven't already submitted your word, put it in the Q&A as well, and we'll hear what you've got to say, and I'll also ask our guests. So another tradition is we have breakfast together in a cool cafe. And I'll introduce our guests formally in a minute, but one of our guests, Tanja Masson-Zwaan, we're visiting your hometown today, Tanja. So perhaps you can just tell us where we are.
Yes, hi, good morning, everyone. And we are in Leiden on the Rapenburg, which is the most famous canal in Leiden. And we are at a cafe named Barerra. And that is, again, one of the most famous and traditional student cafes in Leiden, and it is just across from the Academy building where Leiden University started in 1575. And Barerra is the cafe that is below, again, the most famous student house in Leiden, Huize Welgelegen, from where Erik Hazelhoff-Hulsema, also known as the Soldier of Orange, was studying in Leiden in the war, and was doing all kinds of resistance activities, going in little boats from Scheveningen Beach to England. And so this is still a very famous student home, and the cafe was used by them and is still being used as a place. Unfortunately not at the moment, but at least virtually we're there.
Well, thanks, Tanja. And I always wonder about the Dutch language. It's just an extraordinary language, and you do it proud, but please don't ask us to repeat some of those names that you've just given. Okay, so now's the time to delve into space law. We've got a lot to share with you today. We're going to look at a number of things. We're going to look at the recently announced ideas of having a space court in Dubai, and what's that all about, and do we need it, and does it solve problems, and are commercial disputes made for courts anyway? We're going to look at some quite high profile space tourism adventures perhaps, and filming in space, and PJ is going to walk us through what all that means for law. And then you'll recall that even in the last 24 hours, we've had another 60 Starlink satellites launched. So we're going to look at that and what that might mean for astronomy and the dark skies. There are many other things. As things happen in space, please write to Torsten, write to me, and tell us what you'd like us to deconstruct and demystify in future programs. Anyway, all of the stuff that we look at just demonstrates how multifaceted space is, how sexy, in a sense, space has become, and how interesting and complex it is, and how all of us are affected by space. All of us should have an interest in space, and we're all stakeholders in the way we move forward. So let me introduce two amazing people, great friends of mine, but also people who have done so much for the promotion of space and space law, and really there could be no better people to talk to. Thanks for joining me for breakfast, Tanja and PJ. We've got Tanja Masson-Zwaan. Everybody knows Tanja, but I'll just read her brief bio, but it goes on for a lot more than this. But Tanja is an assistant professor and deputy director at the International Institute of Air and Space Law at lovely Leiden University. She's president emerita at the International Institute of Space Law, and she's adjunct at the International Space University. She advises the Dutch government, and she was a co-founder of the Hague International Space Resources Governance Working Group. Welcome, Tanja. Thanks for joining us. And PJ Blount, who I was on a seminar with on the weekend, and he was described as the Renaissance man. PJ is a research fellow in cybersecurity governance and regulation at SES and the University of Luxembourg. His amazing research is supported by an industrial fellowship grant from the Luxembourg National Research Fund. He's also adjunct in the Air and Law Space Program at University of Mississippi Law School, and is the executive secretary of the International Institute of Space Law. I work very closely with PJ and Tanja in many ways. I'm also a director of the International Institute of Space Law, and both PJ and Tanja do so many things that help that institute promote space law. So let's begin with our traditional question, everybody. In our last program, we asked our guests, Donna Lawler and Chris Newman, their one word about space. And Donna described space law as extraterrestrial, and Chris described it as expansive. Torsten, our in a sense, reality check, described it as ambiguous or ambivalent. And I described it as intergenerational, and we all gave our reasons. So, Tanja, your one word for space law.
I've been thinking about it, but the best I could come up with what fascinates me in space law is infinite. Space law is infinitely interesting, and also infinite in the sense that it is never finished. There's always new activities, new challenges, and stuff like that. So I think infinite would probably cover it. I just asked my daughter over breakfast what hers would be, and she said "cool mom," and I wanted to share that too.
Oh, cool mum, I love that. Okay, thanks, cool mum, and you are, I'm sure, a cool mum. PJ, your one word for space.
So we're going to have a lot of I words, it seems. Mine was innovative, and I think that that's more than just, you know, when we're talking about space, we're always talking about innovation. But if we look at the law itself, the law has been extraordinarily innovative. The Outer Space Treaty pushes a lot of ground in international law in an innovative way, and so I think that one of the challenges, or the way that law has responded to the challenge of space, is to innovate itself in unique ways. And so innovative.
I think that's great. And I love hearing that, because, you know, sometimes you occasionally hear from people that, you know, the Outer Space Treaty, it's obsolete, it's so old, and it doesn't keep up. And so you're absolutely right, innovative, and it does innovate itself. And great words. So infinite and innovate. You know, anyone in the audience, please send Torsten your words as well, and we'll come back to those later. All right, so let's look at this space law, this space court proposal, Tanya. It's the proposal is to establish a space court in the Dubai Financial District for commercial disputes, and those promoting it have said there'll be an overwhelming demand for its services. Do we need it? Do we want it? And is it the right way to move forward? What does it mean for law? Tanya, please help us deconstruct that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I thought it was very interesting when I read this in the news that Dubai was setting up a space court. And one thing I always tell my students when I teach space law is, you know, space law is so fascinating, partly because there is no case law, and so you can actually interpret things yourself. A lot depends on the shoulders of the scholars to interpret the terminology of the treaties. Normally, in other areas of law, you would have jurisprudence, you would have courts who would give decisions on certain matters, interpreting questions that are raised in the treaties that are not always clearly solved. And in space law, we don't have that. So I always think that's a benefit, and that's also why we can have these wonderful moot court competitions, because there's no yes or no or right or wrong answer as long as you know how to argue it. But obviously, with the ongoing commercialization and the increase of new actors, new parties entering the scene, and especially private entities, companies, probably the chance of having disputes that need some way of adjudication will increase. So there may be an increased need to have some kind of format for settling disputes. And of course, space has in the beginning been mostly about states. States can go to the International Court of Justice, for instance. They also have the facilities under the Liability Convention of 1972, which has all kinds of provisions about a so-called claims commission that can be set up if states do not manage to solve their disputes. That has also never been used, by the way, but there is a set of rules for that. But that does not mean that private entities would have standing in those instances. So there may be indeed a future need for having a way of settling disputes that involve non-traditional actors, new space actors. And I think that is probably the rationale, part of the rationale why the UAE decided to have this court. It is, of course, very much in line with the very large ambitions of the UAE, and also having had a mission to Mars, and they're really putting a lot of effort in space exploration, and so that probably is a part of it. On the other hand, you could think, you know, we have since about 10 years, I think, special rules in the Permanent Court of Arbitration, and that is an international organization, and it is settled in The Hague in the same premises where the International Court of Justice is, that court where states can bring their disputes. And that Permanent Court of Arbitration has developed special rules for settling space disputes in 2011. And the PCA is an international organization, and actually the UAE is also a party to it. So when I read the article, I was sort of wondering, you know, why would that be necessary if we have those rules and that court, which gives an international setting? On the topic of arbitration itself, I think it is very interesting because you can have expert arbitrators, you can have confidential proceedings as opposed to a more formal court setting, and it is probably much quicker and possibly cheaper than having court cases. And so I think arbitration per se is very interesting. I wonder who will bring their disputes before a Dubai court, possibly companies from the UAE. I wonder if companies that have no involvement with any business in the UAE would actually go and bring their disputes to the UAE, but it's certainly an interesting development. I think it probably underlines the potential increase of disputes and the need to have something to settle that. And I think I would see it in that light, but I would also call parties to the fact that we have those PCA rules and countries can appoint arbiters and so on. So I think that is possibly also an interesting alternative, but I'd be happy to know what you think about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Will it put us all out of a job? Probably not.
Well, I'm one of the arbitrators, actually,
Yeah, me too. Yeah, but as you say, we haven't had disputes brought to any of these international things. Clearly, there are different types of disputes, different types of actors. PJ, what do you think? I mean, should we have a one-size-fits-all? Is there a one-size-fits-all for mechanisms for dispute, or is this just another string to a large bow, which, as Tanja says, actually hasn't been strung very much?
So I think that one of the things that we have to think about with these is, what do the parties want? And there's this assumption when we establish special rules for the PCA or a space court that the parties want something that's specialized in space. And I would argue that that might not be true. Large multinational companies that would have the ability to go and engage in a dispute in UAE very much probably want a court that is experienced in commercial law and is experienced in contract law. And they want to be able to look at the previous rulings of that court and the rules of that court and understand that as a commercial actor, they are going to be protected, not so much as a space actor, but they want somebody that is going to be able to read their contract and understand what they contracted for and protect their interests in that way. I mean, obviously, we can get to a place where we can come up with hypotheticals where special rules for space are going to be really important because the event that gives rise to the dispute is so particularized to space. But I think that most actors really are going to be much more concerned with the jurisdiction's past treatment of commercial actors and how that plays out.
Yeah, that's interesting. We had some comments while you were talking about, enforcement, and I still go back to this point that with all of the disputes, and I've been given advice to a whole range of people in different contexts, people avoid litigation. They avoid, even though arbitration portrays itself as having some advantages in terms of flexibility and time, they're still costly, and people avoid that. And in space, people have ongoing relationships, and so perhaps going to court mightn't be the best way. Torsten, what do you think? I mean, do you think law and courts are the right way to solve commercial space disputes, or do you think we should think about this with different eyes?
Let me ask first of all, and I know I'm outing me as a non-lawyer, what is PCA? I mean, maybe I'm the only
permanent court of
arbitration that doesn't know that, but or maybe once or demystify it.
I love that. I love that. Permanent court of arbitration, which is based in The Hague, and yeah.
Obviously, yeah.
Obviously.
Okay, no, but back to your question. I think we do need a rule set, and that will then end up in a court, of course, for the ultimate the ultimate solution, actually. So, but I think we are still on this way to define this global rule set that everybody can buy in. And I mean, we have all this discussion about space debris and so on and so forth, sustainability, the guidelines, and so on and so forth. So at the moment we are operating in an not well-defined. It is defined, yeah, but not well-defined area. So, commercial companies don't like these kind of definitions if it's too defined. I mean, see the environmental rules that we have, they have a reason, but companies might see their limits also in their own growth. So, and I think, yes, absolutely, we need a specialized court for space topics. So, and I don't say it has to be Dubai. I mean, I'm going with Tanja that there might be our existing court that have a department for that. That might be a solution because that's established already in the various forms. So that's my 5 cents for that. And excuse this stupid question. No,
not at all.
Many arbitrations are, of course, already taking place. And let's when I said there is no case law, that I meant between states, but arbitration is already being used. But they usually also take place in the International Chamber of Commerce or other institutions that are specialized in arbitration.
I mean, there are well-established. You're right, Tanja. There are well-established institutions already. But the fact remains that the whole system of commercial space is built around, and I really want to get to this point, that PJ made about customers wanting people who understand commercial contracts and understanding how commercial contracts work. But we all know that in space commercial contracts, there are unique features, right? You can't pull off the shelf a commercial contract. If you're buying a satellite, you can't pull off the shelf a contract for buying a truck, right? There are differences. The whole system of space is built around risk management through insurance and through cross waivers, which, I talk to government, my friends talk to government in space procurement contracts, and we have such a tough time saying to the government, oh, by the way, you have to waive your rights to sue people if they get it wrong. Governments just shake their head and say, which planet are you from, if you'll pardon the pun. But that's the way space works. So with the extensive use of cross waivers, Tanja, and the unique features of space commercial contracts, aren't they in there already to stop commercial disputes and to have this understanding that, okay, this is a hazardous business, I'll take my risk, you'll take your risk. If you screw up or I screw up, okay, we're unhappy, the insurance companies will take care of it, and maybe we won't work together again. But to then go to court and prolong that, isn't that going against what we're trying to do in developing a worldwide space industry? What do you think? And also you, PJ, but Tanja first.
Yeah, I really like that thought, and you see that also in many space contracts, and a prime example is the International Space Station, where the inter-party liability waiver is an explicit article in the treaty governing the International Space Station. And the thought behind is, yes, we all want to work together and build something and make space happen, and so we should not be boiled down in legal proceedings, and we should each take our risk, of course, with the exceptions of gross negligence or willful misconduct or personal injury and things like that. But that mainly is about when you talk about inter-party relations. But you could, of course, also have cases where there is a third party that is damaged, that has nothing to do with that contractual relationship, where you want to protect the productivity of things. But you should also foresee cases where there is a third party that gets hurt and that might want to sue, and that's not the party that would be bound by that inter-party liability waiver.
No, that's true. That's true. Lots of questions. PJ, what do you think?
The idea of the third party, I think, is actually really salient, because that's where you might actually see something like the UAE Space Court come in. Somebody gets damaged and they think, I'll go to this court and drag that person in. And it's going to be a question of whether or not they can actually drag somebody into that jurisdiction. So likely it would only be a company that's already operating there. But, back to the cross waiver idea, I mean, cross waivers really kind of take care of tort liability. And I think that you know, when we talk about space courts, we always kind of jump to this, oh, it's about when satellites collide with each other, whereas really the common disputes are going to be things about contracts, things about, you know, in the telecom area, how much service got lost on a transponder, which are these sort of particularized things. And I think then this goes back to this idea of where parties are comfortable pursuing these claims, and that idea of arbitration is a big one, right? I mean, I think that most corporate contracts default to arbitration these days before they go to the choice of law clause. And so, yeah, I think that the cross waivers take care of some of it, but they're just kind of taking care of tort, whereas there's this whole other world of liability out there that I think is still open after the cross waivers are signed.
Yeah, it's interesting though. I've seen contracts where cross waivers are an integral part, and so you and I, PJ, we'd have an agreement. You know, I'd sell you something or give you a service or something. We agree as between ourselves, but as part of the deal, you have to agree that all of your customers can't sue me as well. You know, so it's quite extraordinary, and so it'll be interesting. Obviously, it's early days for the Dubai court, and you know, we wish them well, and we think anything that promotes the idea that we all want to move forward in space is a great thing. But I still think there's a lot of work to be done to try to work out the appropriate way to resolve disputes. And you know, sitting down and talking to someone is sometimes a good thing. All right, well, let's move on because we've got lots of things to talk about. So I want to move on to something completely different, which is
do you mind if we
oh, is there a question? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Torsten.
I mean, we have a number of questions on that topic, or if I mean.
Yes, go ahead. Let's get one or two of them, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, Olga challenged us with a good paragraph already here. So also, I think Johnson asking about the Japanese action regarding Myanmar satellite. Is that legal? Or I think that fits perfect in this demystifying. So how do you see that with a quick feedback, and then we take one of Olga's.
Well, so for those who mightn't be aware, there's a satellite, a contract between the Myanmar and Japan, and there's a satellite that's been built as part of the Myanmar's space program. And then with events happening in Myanmar at the moment, there are real questions about what that satellite might be used for. Of course, you know, none of us know, but the suggestions by some are that this remote sensing satellite could be used for military purposes or whatever. And so there are real questions as to whether that satellite should in fact then be sent from Japan and provided to Myanmar. The contract, I understand it's been paid for, perhaps not, but anyway, there are contractual obligations. And, you know, I read that with interest. I've been speaking to newspaper people and media people in various places around the world on this topic, but I'm really interested to see whether Tanja or PJ, you have a view. This is a question that's not unique to space, of course. You know, there have in the past been questions about the production of armaments, you know, weapons, which is a huge industry, and should that be provided to countries who might use it in the wrong ways, and training services and all of that. This is a contractual arrangement about the provision of a remote sensing satellite. It's a tough question, and none of us know what is really going on in terms of the specifics. But as a matter of principle, PJ, Tanja, do you have a view about this?
I mean, I think that it would probably fall to Japanese contract law, which I obviously don't know. I barely know American contract law. But I mean, I think that probably there's this general idea that if there's been sort of I'm going to use an international law term here, a fundamental change in circumstances, that the the contract can be broken. And my understanding is that they've just put it on hold, the delivery of the satellite until we can figure everything out. But I would imagine that it probably falls under one of these categories, and that's just a guess though. And I like to guess.
Although fundamental circumstances is more about treaties than contracts.
I was using an international law term, but there's a similar one in contract law that I just can't put my hands on right now.
All right. If we have a Japanese contract lawyer in the audience, they will set us right. Tanya, do you have a view on this?
Well, it's a thorny issue, of course, and it shows how political space is also. And from what I understand, and I've only been reading about it in the press, and of course that may give you only one side of an issue, is that there is a concern that there might be indeed abuse of the satellite, and that the parties who originally commissioned it cannot be contacted in the current situation and so on. And you can wonder whether the deployment of the satellite, because it is on board of Kibo, right, the Japanese laboratory on ISS, it's already in space, and so the question is, should it be deployed? Is that a launch? I don't know, but should it be thrown out of the Kibo laboratory, or should it be held? Should there be United Nations Security Council sanctions or something that would prohibit Myanmar from launching a satellite, then there would be a legal ground for it. At the moment, I don't know whether there is, and we all know that space is being used for military purposes, and of course an Earth observation satellite, yes, can also be used for military purposes, but that's not in itself contrary to international law. So by launching or not launching, you are sort of taking probably a political position in an international dispute, and it's sad that space is subject to that, and that it is happening. I don't know what is the right answer, but it's certainly an interesting issue.
Absolutely, and it highlights even more how space is ubiquitous and how it's relevant to so many things that are going on. I'm looking at Olga's questions, and is there a case for an IT loss body? What about the different types of disputes between states and companies, and what about the ICJ? On the ICJ,
International Court of Justice.
My apologies, everybody. I'm sorry. Oh, I am so sorry. Tanya, thank you. We use so many acronyms, and I apologize, ladies and gentlemen. The International Court of Justice, the World Court in The Hague, has in the past set up expert chambers. So they set up an environmental law chamber, and it's an area that's also of interest to many of us. At the time, everybody thought that was a great idea. Well, guess what? No states ever asked for that chamber to hear a matter, even though there were a number of issues that came to the ICJ that had environmental issues involved. Rather, the states wanted to hear the whole court rather than the specialized chamber. Specialized chambers, of course they're important, and of course we would all love to have specialized space courts, but disputes are not necessarily just about technical space issues, like this dispute that we've got with between Myanmar and Japan, if we can call it a dispute. But this situation, it's about space, but it's about so many other things as well. So specialized chambers might be difficult, and Olga's right, and this is my point about the one size fits all. It doesn't, because there are so many different actors in space. You're going to have so many different types of disputes. The traditional state against state dispute that Tanya talked about, but you're going to have states against non-governmental entities and intergovernmental organizations involved, and then of course two companies might be involved. So again, it gets back to this point of one size fits all. Let's move on, although I know there's a lot more to talk on this, but we could, unless Torsten gives us 3 hours rather than 1 hour. I think
I'm afraid we are on half time already, and we just finished the welcome. So
no, that's right. Go. Thanks. Well, look, let's move on to, as I said, something completely different. We've heard a lot about humans going to space. Of course, we're all in awe of the human missions on the SpaceX and all of that. But we're hearing some really interesting stories now. So Tom Cruise is going to go to the ISS with his director to film. We don't know whether it's going to be a Mission Impossible or something else. He's going to film on the ISS later this year. And there was Jim Bridenstine, the former head of NASA, said at the time that was announced that, hey, this is great. We need these sort of things to help NASA's ambitious plans to become a reality. You know, you need social media, you need films. Okay, that's interesting. And then we've got this curious case of a Japanese billionaire, Yusaku Maezawa. Now, Mr. Maezawa wants to go to the moon. Originally, he wants to go around the moon, excuse me. Originally, he wanted to have the next John Lennon and Picasso, budding artists. But then he changed his mind and said, well, in fact, no, I'm looking for a girlfriend. I want a bright and positive girl to accompany me on this space flight. Apparently, he got tens of thousands of people responding. But he's now scrapped those plans, and he's now calling for 8 people to join him on this mission. So, PJ, you know, space, I talked at the beginning about space being sexy. Space really is becoming, you know, red carpet stuff in a way. We've got film crews, we've got billionaires, we've got, you know, girlfriends, we've got, all of these things. What's your take on all of this? And, you know, in a serious way, what does this do for law, and what does this do for the way we need to regulate these sorts of activities and humans in space? What do you think?
Well, so before I move to the law, and I have to apologize. I feel like my face is becoming more ephemeral and blending into my background. I'm not a ghost. I'm not a cat.
And it's only 8 o'clock in the morning for you.
I've barely gotten into the sandwich over here. So let me name this segment why PJ is mad at Richard Branson. And so I just want to root my skepticism here really deeply and tell you all a quick story. When I was new to this wonderful field of space law, it was a time in which you could go to a conference and be assaulted by PowerPoint presentation after PowerPoint presentation about why commercial human spaceflight was just like luxury cruises. And that was the economic
but we've seen what luxury cruises are like in this time.
Yes, exactly. And me being, you know, young and I'm this is great, this is awesome. I bet my mother in like 2008 that we would see Richard Branson fly a space tourist by the end of 2010. And I'm terrified that she's out there watching and will remember that I owe her $100 based on this. So my point to all this is that I feel like we've been here before, right? 10, 15 years ago, we were seeing the same things. There were movies in space. Lance Bass was going to go to space. We were going to do all this stuff. And I have no doubt that some of these people that have done these contracts to go to space are going to go to space. I don't necessarily think that we're at a sudden turning point. And I think that a lot of the space tourism, sort of the idea behind it, is trying to get our launch rate up to bring launch costs down. I've seen it referred to as space tourism as the killer app, that, once we start spending, 600-700 people to space every year, then launch costs will come down. And then we can do that space settlement thing that we all want to do so badly. Which is a whole nother rant that I can go on. But so I'm deeply skeptical of this, because I think that it's a bit more of the same, right? We're sending rich people to space, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we've hit this, wonderful new democratized space that we keep hearing about at all the conferences. That said, legal issues, there are tons, right? You've got your standard liability issues, and a lot of places have put in these waiver of liabilities, not waiver of informed consent laws, so that space operators essentially have to tell, if you guys are all going to fly on my craft, I have to sit you down for a meeting and say, look, you're likely to die or be maimed during this activity, and that's on you. You can't sue me for that. So we have those laws. But I mean, just the idea of Tom Cruise going to the ISS and filming a movie, I mean, can you think about all the risk that is being undertaken there? There is a film director showing up with cameras that wants to put the camera in a certain place to get the shot that he needs. Well, if that camera then interferes with the life support system, we have major problems there. And so there are all these issues. And then, there's this raft of traditional issues that we've seen, hashed out in the academic discourse for years. Is a space tourist personnel under the rescue and return agreement, right? If a tourism craft or this Japanese guy and his 8 crewmates are in distress around the moon, do we have
maybe eight girlfriends? Perhaps.
Maybe 8 girlfriends. Do we have to go save them, or do we just leave them up there? And so I think there's been some interesting work done on this recently. I know that for the people on the Axiom flight, the flight that Axiom has brokered, there have been a lot of, there was a huge contract negotiation on that that probably covered all sorts of interesting things that, we as lawyers would love to get our hands on that contract so we would know exactly what they are. But I mean, I think that you can just sit and name legal issues all day on this one, because there are tons.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about Richard Branson. I was on a documentary way back in 2005 on space, and I remember distinctly Richard Branson was on the same doco and was talking about Virgin Galactic as it was at the time, and said, and he's an amazing man and he's got amazing ideas, but he said in 2005, 3 years from now. So you were right, 2008, PJ. 3 years from now, we'll be sending rockets up every day, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, no disrespect, because it's really hard, as you say. That 3 years has continued to be 3 years from now, every year, so to speak, for a long time, and maybe still. That said, we're getting closer now. And it's interesting because I remember when the first quote-unquote space tourist went up, Dennis Tito, to the space station, NASA said, we don't want him anywhere near the US area because he's an untrained person, and things might go wrong, press the wrong buttons. Now we've got, not so many years later, NASA and others welcoming, as you say, film crews into the space station. Tom Cruise is amazing. He does incredible things, but I can't believe he's a trained astronaut and knows which buttons to press. And
you didn't see Mission Impossible? Whatever.
But Tanya, it raises more serious questions, and there are so many legal issues, as PJ says. It raises issues for me about what rights do people have when they go to space? If there's an emergency, I speculated on another broadcast I did recently about what happens if there's a pandemic on the space station. And indeed, one of the Apollo missions, they all had a virus, not the virus, but a virus. So what does the law say? Does the law say anything about the rights of humans going to space? If there's an emergency or they want to come back or they're not getting enough food or whatever. What do you think?
Yeah, there's not an awful lot, but we do have, of course, the famous Article 5 in the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, which says astronauts are envoys of mankind and they have to be receiving every possible assistance in case of distress or emergency landings. But then we do not have exactly a definition of what an astronaut is, and we do not have specific rules for the chain of command on board a spaceship, so to say. So like on an aircraft or a ship, you have the captain and the crew and the passengers, and that kind of hierarchy, you do not have any rules for that in space, except for one example, which is the ISS, the International Space Station again, which has a crew code of conduct, which establishes a certain hierarchy and sets lines of conduct, and also the duty of the commander to protect the crew and so on. And you have that famous word spaceflight participants, which sort of covers the space tourists, because of course they don't like to be called tourists, because they do go through certain amount of training, obviously, because you would not want to jeopardize the multi-billion-dollar structure that we've been building for the last 20 years. But I think there is really a need, once these flights are really going to be happening, whether it's orbital to the ISS or to the moon, or whether it's suborbital with Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos and so on, we will need specific rules. And like you have in shipping, women and children first if there is an emergency and the captain leaves the ship last. Things like that, we do not have any rules for that. And to look at the more closer field of air law, you have a very elaborate system of passenger liability and third-party liability, to come back again to liability. We will need to come up with some of these rules before these flights will become reality, and I'm sure that they are going to happen. And even if it's in the beginning very rich people, in the end that will become, I think it will contribute to democratizing space and opening the doors for, not me, I wouldn't want to go, but you guys can go.
Well, that's right. Torsten, I'm about to offer you the chance of a lifetime. You have the lucky person who've been chosen to be on the first permanent settlement on the moon. What guarantees would you want before you stepped into that rocket to take you there?
I'm a super lucky person already, because I've got the chance to get my first vaccination shot tomorrow. So I mean, that is what counts.
Is that in preparation for going to the moon? Is it?
Yeah, I don't want to ask the question. So what vaccination I do need to go there? But honestly, thinking about your question is, I mean, I'm on Tanja's side. It's not something for me. I mean, I like space, no doubt, but for me, it's over. I want to go there. I mean, 30 kilometers up to see the overview effect. Yeah, fine, but that's as far as I would go. So I'm fine with an intercontinental flight. Yeah, so to say, or that's high enough for me. So, but in case of, and taking this intellectual exercise here, for me, it counts the governance model, and where the protection and the guarantees will follow on. But we are not there yet. I mean, we have the Moon Dialogues and all the other forums at the moment. They discuss some new forums. So what can we do? What should we do? We have the Artemis Accords, was mentioned in the comments here as well. How we see that. For me, it does not feel comfortable at the moment, because I see that we take what we have on Earth just one-to-one to the moon or wherever we want to go. But we don't think new, and that we bring ourselves to the limits, or we challenging our life, I think it's better wording, with how we proceed, or all our doing at the moment. For me, it's, yeah, I mean, governance is for me the key word here. I would like to know the governance model that is applied to before I go there.
Yeah, understood. I mean, PJ, if we have...
it's a long answer for me to say I have no clue. So
yeah. Well, none of us do, although I'm sure Tanja and PJ have great ideas. I mean, PJ, if we have permanent settlements, humans will do what humans do, right? They want to get married, they'll have kids, they'll kill each other, they'll do all these things. I mean, what are the... law is important here, but so is moral and ethics. I mean, what are the issues that we really need to think about if we're going to be serious about this?
So weirdly, I've recently been writing a chapter on this, and so there. I have to divide it up into sort of segments, right? In the near term, when we think about settlers, what we're talking about is employees, right? Elon Musk isn't going to send up a bunch of people that have their backpacks and are on covered wagons and are going to go settle Mars because they think they're going to get rich there. No, these are going to be employees of SpaceX, and that means that their rights are going to be negotiated via a contract, and I think that's an interesting thing when we think about it in terms of, you know, the contracts that we've already seen out of SpaceX. I think it was the Starlink contract that said that the moon is its own thing and it doesn't have any law, right? But
wrong and wrong.
Yeah. but I mean, I think that you know, but we do have to think about the ethics and the morals in that. I mean, there was the, we can name all these companies that have come up with these ideas and then fizzled away. I think the Mars-1 is the one I'm thinking of, where they were going to send people on this one-way trip to settle Mars. And it's like, well, I mean, certainly you owe the people that you're about to ship off to Mars something. You know, do you owe them resupply, or do you think that, the packet of seeds for corn that they're going to take with them is enough? And so these moral and ethical questions, I think, are really going to come to the fore if we are going to pursue space settlement, because we do have to think about the rights of settlers vis-a-vis the Earth. But as we move off further into the midterm and the long term, I actually think there's this really interesting moment that we've moved away from calling it, colonizing space because of the implications of that. But at some point, I do think that you get what I call a colonial moment, wherein the people in that settlement are like, you know what? We don't need you guys anymore. We don't want your governance. We want to do our own thing. And that is a fascinating legal question to think about. And we're so far away from that, because that means that the settlement itself doesn't get to rely on Earth anymore, because Earth, if you don't need Earth, then Earth might not ship you the resupply that you need. Yeah. But that question of, then how do we think about that settlement in terms of international relations, right? Are they a state? Do they get to negotiate with other states, or are they something different? Are they, the company town again? And so there are just so many kind of folds that you can get into thinking about the philosophical aspects of this, that it makes it really fun thought exercise. But I will still say I'm deeply rooted in skepticism over the enterprise.
Yeah, I agree. There's so many parallels there with countries that are wanting to break away and become parts of countries that are wanting to break away and be independent, perhaps, like I was thinking there as an example, maybe Greenland, if that's the right example. But they have to be self-sufficient in one sense, because once you break away, then you can't rely on support. So it's interesting. Look, we're running late as always, which is great, and I really wanted us to touch, albeit in the next 5 minutes only, really. The other thing I wanted to talk about was Starlink and astronomy. Starlink launched another 60 yesterday. We know that OneWeb's going to launch another 36, and we've got plans from others. But there's some resistance, Tanja, isn't there, amongst the astronomy community and those supporting the astronomy community about having all of these low Earth orbit objects in the sky, and what sort of things are happening there? Sorry, we're running short of time, but I'm sure our listeners would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I think it's a fascinating topic, and it really puts again to the fore the fact that there are, what I started with earlier, there are now so many users and beneficial uses of outer space that we have to somehow make sure that they can all happen. And I think Starlink is doing wonderful things. It's very important that we have broadband internet for the global community, although I don't know whether really 42,000 satellites are needed. But let's say the premise of it is good. It is a freedom of exploration and use, and it is beneficial for humanity. On the other hand, we have the scientists who are often working with public funding, and astronomy is extremely important also for our knowledge of the universe. It contributes to our understanding of many things, and so when these two uses clash, and that is what is happening, because the astronomers are obstructed, especially in the field of optical astronomy, but apparently also in the field of radio astronomy, in their observations by the huge increase of small satellites, especially in low Earth orbit. There is a mission for those who are overseeing those users to behave responsibly and to take all those stakes into account and find some way a balance. And what we see currently is that states are authorizing and supervising private activities, and that's the obligation that is provided in the Outer Space Treaty again, that they're not really looking at the, let's say, environmental impact or the interference on other users. And I think that that is really a responsibility of states to look at that, and perhaps that should be underlined more. And I see there also a task for UN COPOS, the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, where actually at the upcoming meeting in next month, hopefully, there will be a working paper submitted by the International Astronomical Union, which is a very large association of thousands of astronomers, asking attention for this. And I know that certain countries are signing that working paper, are joining its submission. My country is one of them. But there are international organizations like the Square Kilometer Array organization that recently became an intergovernmental organization that all have interest, and they all should be taken into account. It should be done in the right way. I have the impression that in the past perhaps there was too much emphasis on saying, you know, the dark skies are a human right, or they have to be protected under the UNESCO World Heritage Convention. I don't think that that is the right way to go about it, but I do really see an issue where the interests of science have to be protected against interference, harmful interference by commercial projects. And again, it's not to say that these commercial projects are not beneficial, but there has to be some kind of a balance of the interests of both. So you see Starlink, you know, making dark sets or visor sets. They have means to reduce the reflection of the satellite. So things like that have to become commonplace, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because somebody said to me recently, there are only two groups in the world that want satellites to become darker and less visible. That is the intelligence community and the astronomy community that want Starlink to do this. You know, it's really, really interesting. And one of our listeners made the really valid point that it's not just astronomers that are worried about this. I mean, it's all of us that have concerns, and space has a lot of meaning for indigenous communities. Certainly in my country, we've had 65,000 years of indigenous people living here, and space is part of that perspective. PJ, how do we get the balance right? How do we get the balance right between, obviously, we want to encourage appropriate commercial space activities and have benefits that filter down to all of us and clear, but how do we do that and protect the integrity, the uniqueness of space? Where is the balance?
I mean, I think this is one of the core problems of space law. I mean, you have one core problem, which is how do we keep conflict out of space? The other core problem, and you see this right out of the gate in the Outer Space Treaty, is very much figuring out how do we accommodate this scientific inquiry that we need, as well as, you know, thinking about the other uses. And I think that it's going to take some bit of state engagement on this. I mean, one of the problems is that the states that are authorizing these aren't actually thinking about this astronomy problem. They're thinking about, you know, I've got this commercial company here that wants to do this thing, and commerce is good, so let's do that. But I would note, and this is just trivia mostly, that like my favorite little piece of statute in the U.S. Code is thinking about this before. In the 80s, you know, some company thought they were going to get headlines and said, we're going to launch a billboard into space. And Congress passed a law that says you can't have advertising that's visible from space or visible from the Earth in space. You get what I'm saying,
yeah, that's
right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think that it's fascinating that we have thought about this before, but the dynamics have changed in such a way that now we're seeing sort of the other side, where we're not paying attention to that issue anymore, and we're just authorizing the activity.
Absolutely. You know, so the United States has national law that prohibits what they call obtrusive advertising in space. And as PJ said, you know, we're trying to work out what obtrusive means, but it essentially means visible to the naked eye. And there were plans, I believe, during the Atlanta Olympics to have, was it Coca-Cola or Pepsi, lights on the moon? You know, wouldn't that have been wonderful? Anyway, but I find it ironic and interesting that the United States is the only country that has legislation that bans this sort of advertising. There are plans, for example, I spoke recently about some plans from a Russian company that wants to put out these advertisements.
I haven't heard about that. That was a while ago. No, I haven't seen.
Yeah, that was a while, and I think they're still talking, but we shall see. Torsten, we're running out of time, but let's have some questions from the audience. What have you got?
There are dozens of questions, and I'm afraid we will not be able. I mean, I would like to put them together and send them over to you, and then with our recap, we will send them out. But there's one I've seen from Annie who just stated that she had heard you second time in a few days talking about killing each other in space, and if you're okay, I mean, should we have to be concerned about you?
That's really kind. Thank you. Yeah, it's been a tough, stressful time. Thank you. But I also see the same Annie saying that there's a TV show called The Bachelor that needs to be made more interesting. Again, maybe they should shoot a season in space. I'm not sure about that. There are so many issues that have come up in the questions. There's lots of mention of the Artemis Accords. Yeah. It's amazing how, I mean, understandable, but also amazing how much traction the Artemis Accords have in every conversation about space. And so we spoke about the Artemis Accords. Chris Newman, really took us through it in our first Space Breakfast, but maybe we should do an Artemis Accords Mark 2 or 3 in a future one. Anyway, there's many questions. Someone said, PJ, can you continue on your settlement rant? But I think you've got a fan there.
I'll take it to Twitter.
That's right. Any last minute thoughts on where we go from here with space? Tanya, I've always thought that if we can, we get to the point now where we need to prioritize things. And as both you and PJ have said, countries, when they're authorizing, they don't perhaps take that broader perspective. It's about encouraging their own domestic interests, which is understandable. But, I always say now, if we can do 500 things in space, maybe we need to start prioritizing and working out what the top 300 are. And devoting our resources, because everything takes time, effort, money, management skills, all of that. And everything, as PJ said, is inherently risky. Do you think that's a good idea? Do we need to prioritize? And if so, how do we go about doing that?
Well, that would be my first question. Who would get to say what has to be prioritized? I mean, that is, I think, the question probably ends there, because I don't know who has the authority to say your project is more valuable than mine. But what this does underline, I think, is that we really need to move and get rules of the road in place, and that puts the topic of space traffic management very high on the agenda, and clearly is something that we have to do something about. And I think Torsten is also preparing. You're also preparing some publications on this, and there are projects going on and so on. Yes, there has to be some kind of weighing of interest. We cannot do everything. But I don't know who would decide which project would be more valuable than another. Would you know? How would you do that?
PJ, your thoughts? I mean, you were talking about we need international engagement. We've faced tough decisions in the past, and we've come to decisions after tough bargaining. Whilst I agree it's hard, I don't agree that we shouldn't do it because we don't know how we're going to do it. We just have to find a way forward. PJ, do you have thoughts about
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're at a very exciting time for space. We're seeing a lot of new applications come out. We don't know which ones are going to pan out. I mean, I'm never solid in the things that we're seeing today are actually going to be the things that are successful tomorrow. But we're
3 years from now. 3 years from now. Yeah.
But the change in technology is impressive right now, and the law is going to have to keep up with that. And I think that one of the things that is key is that idea that comes with space traffic management, and comes with international engagement of coordination. We have to understand that the space activity that the company in your state is doing is not the only space activity up there, and all space activities have this capacity to interfere with each other, and we need to manage that risk, and we need to manage that, and we can't depend on the commercial sector to do it on their own, but we also can't depend on single states to do it on their own.
COPOS and ITU.
Yeah.
COPOS and ITU. I think those are the keywords.
They are. But even if states do the right thing, Tanja, we've had examples now with the famous tardigrades and the swarm bees where you're still going to have bad behavior. I mean, again, that's not unique to space.
But that's really the minority, right? I mean, in general, we have managed to really have a huge progress and peaceful coexistence and great steps for humankind, I think. So let's emphasize that. Oh, yeah. Torsten doesn't agree.
I hear you, and I would love to believe
I'm an optimist.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm an optimist by heart as well, but with some pessimistic focus.
That's healthy.
But I think it's important to remember that law is not ever completely effective, right? We've outlawed murder, but murder still happens.
Exactly.
It's about reducing the bad acts.
Yeah, but go ahead, Torsten. Sorry.
I have the impression that we are on a very small island, and I mean, just to put it into a wider context, I mean, we talk about space here. For 99% of humanity, space is somewhere up there, and they don't care. So we have other really global issues. I mean, we have PJ, your work on cyber, on disarmament, on environmental protection, and so on and so forth. I mean, really huge problems as well. Plus, we have a pandemic going on, and if we see how we on the tactical manage this pandemic in the various countries in a non-coordinated effort, I mean, that is something what really drives me crazy to see that. And then talking about space and trying to reach this Elysium of, hey, we love each other and we have a nice governance model on the moon. No, it will not happen, in my opinion. I mean, maybe I'm too sarcastic on that, but I mean, and I work for it and I fight for it that we will be there. But how likely it is, I don't know. But I mean, that's why we do these series here. I mean, we had this wonderful session on Tuesday with Darren McKnight on space debris or space traffic management. People coming back afterwards and said, oh, we didn't know. And these are followers of us. We didn't know how real that is already. I have the pleasure, and I will talk about it in a second when I announce the next event. I have the pleasure on after the Easter break to talk with Alexandre Vallée from the ITU. He is the man at the ITU who rules that all. So, and if he does not have answers, wow. Yeah. And so I try to find our way to how to navigate, but always in context of, hey, we are just one element in this huge puzzle with our thoughts. And last point on that, and I picked Darren's word. I mean, LSAD, Astroscale's mission, just launched successfully, and we cheer them. And I was wearing the Space Sweeper shirt with pride. And think, yeah, it's a good way, but there's another spacecraft that becomes part of the problem. And I think that's what we have to think about. So what is the benefit of a global internet powered by Starlink if it's just a commercial endeavor for one company, one person? It's not for the benefit of all. It's a commercial thing.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's being portrayed in, if you speak to the Starlink people or those that are promoting the goal of creating and providing internet to they say 1/3 of the world's population that don't have ready access to continual internet. That's a laudable goal, but there are other laudable goals, and I think what we're all saying and is that we do have to start thinking about prioritization. And sure, it's going to be hard, but we need to start, in my opinion at least, working out criteria for what is appropriate, what is not. I remember even raising this a long time ago when Mir was on its last legs, so to speak, and a commercial company wanted to buy Mir and create a love hotel in space for people to have honeymoons in space. Well, you can have your own view on that, but without being judgmental, everything in space is hard. Everything in space is risky. Things can go wrong, and there are so many benefits to be gained if things go right. But we just have to start thinking about what makes sense. And I completely agree, Tanja. It's impossibly difficult. But I don't think, and I know you're not saying that either, I don't think we can turn away from the reality that at some point we need to have those discussions. And that is not just about lawyers, and it's not just about diplomats, but it's about the indigenous people, it's about cultural factors, it's about religious factors, economic factors, so many factors, and national security, of course, plays a role. And, the lawyers have a role to play as well, but the law should be a reflection of listening to all those voices rather than, as we've all said, if we do some law over here, it might stuff something up over here. But anyway, I'm now ranting as well.
Yes.
Tanja, any last thoughts, Tanja, before I hand it back to Torsten?
No, I think we've underlined that space law is a wonderful field, is an important field, and we could go on for hours more. And I think that this concept of a space law breakfast, to talk about it, is great to raise awareness, and that is important. And there's no right or wrong, but it's important to get all the facts on the table and try to find at least the best way forward. And it is our destiny to explore and to expand our borders, but let's do it in a governed and wise manner.
Yeah, really, really salient words. Thanks. PJ, any last thoughts? Any last rants?
No, I won't go on to any rants. I would love to, but I've enjoyed this, and thanks for having me. I hope to appear again at some point, because this has been fun and I think really productive. So yeah, I enjoyed it.
Well, let me on behalf of Torsten thank you, Tanja, and you, PJ. I mean, the hour and 10 minutes has just flown through, and we've really, as you know, we've covered about a quarter of what we meant to cover, but it's been fantastic, and having the two of you here, having breakfast together, has been great. So let me thank you both very much, and I think it's been a fantastic breakfast. Thanks to everybody who's stayed around to listen. I know we've got lots of questions still, and Torsten will circulate that, and we'll do our best. But please join us for our next Space Law Breakfast on the 27th of May. We've got amazing people again, Jenny Tapio and Alexander Suchek, dear friends of all of us, but also incredible people who do incredible things also in the field of regulation and law and human rights in space and all that. And so please, please, please sign on to that. If you find this notion of a space law breakfast interesting, please write to me, please write to Torsten and tell us what you want us to talk about, because we can only talk about one or two or three things, but there are so many issues. So I'll hand back to Torsten, but thanks to everybody for hanging around. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay safe. Again, PJ, Tanja, you were fantastic, and I owe you one. Enjoy the rest of your breakfast, yeah? And Torsten, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, thank you for another fantastic panel, and thank you all in the audience for your questions, for your feedback. That makes it very important for us to know if we are on the right track. The best email to reach both of us is spacecafé@SpaceWatch.Global, and then we circulate it to the people involved. If you have ideas or thoughts, please let us know. I mean, most of you know that we run an quite intense, quite diverse series of space cafes in the meantime. I mean, yesterday or on Tuesday I had the 50s, 33 minutes already in the last year, and I think we will come up to about 100 space cafes in the various formats this year. So I mean, at least we have fun with it, but as long as we have visitors and listeners, so I think we also can give something back to you. And again, for the next Space Cafe Space Law Breakfast, we are looking forward to have another dream team on stage with Jenny and Alex, and we will have a lot of fun. So, but as mentioned, the next weeks are full. Again, this evening we will continue with space law. Isn't that fantastic? I mean, we will bring it to the next level.
You can't get enough.
Competition.
Absolutely. No, now we will talk to the real thing. No, we try to reach out to the next generation, to get people in your classes. I mean, to get people interested on space law. And who will do that? Our editor-in-chief, Markus Peyer, in the first Young Global Talents at 7 p.m. European time today. And our guest, or Markus' guest, will be Michel Henlon, to inspire people about space law. So we continue on next week, the 33 minutes format. I will have Arti Holamani from ESOR talking with me, and then, as mentioned, the week after the Easter break, I will talk with Alexandre Vallée from the ITU. In the same week, we have the 4th edition of Moriba's Vox Populi on space security and space environment. And then we will follow on with the 2nd edition of the Space Cafe UAE, this time potentially in Arabic. And then I will have Robert Feuerbach. We will start the 2nd series of Space Cafe Brazil in Portuguese, and we will launch Space Cafe Scotland. So isn't that amazing? And so we continue our way through the world and signing up with more and more countries to do it in their local language. And no, it will not be in Scottish. It will be proper English, I hope. to have
best accent in the world.
Okay. So, and as always, we would like to hear your feedback. So please check in with us on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on email, or as you know, or Facebook. So don't forget to sign up to our daily or bi-weekly newsletters. And if you like to treat yourself with something special, again, become a Space Watcher. Take your credit card and visit our fan shop at shop.spacewatch.global. And yes, it's a commercial endeavor, but we make it to survive our shows here. And as we have seen, there's a huge demand, but I know, but we need your support. Let's make it that easy. Thank you all for your interest for today, and thank you again, Stephen, Tanja, PJ, for this inspiring chat in our 2nd session. And I hope, Stephen, you are happy as well.
Oh, look, it was great. I mean, having PJ and Tanja, you couldn't do better. Being here in Leiden, at least in theory, is wonderful, and just getting interest and feedback from people. And you know, our goal here is to not preach to the converted, you know, not preach to the people who already love space law, but to, as we say, demystify it and just bring others into the fold and just say space is relevant, space is wonderful, law plays a part, and let's all work together. So thanks again.
So next time we will see each other then in Helsinki, in one of the nice coffee shops in Helsinki. Thanks again, but on that stage as well, to our entire team behind the scene for doing their great job and running that smoothly as always. I hope you all will stay safe and stay healthy, and thanks for joining us. Hope to see you next week or this evening. In the meantime, visit our website, follow us on social media, and don't forget, become a Space Watcher. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.